Welcome to this special in-studio episode of Maranatha Mission Stories. I'm Dustin Comm. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at Maranatha's water drilling program. From its conception in the late 2000s to the expansion of the program in recent years, we'll go inside the story and talk to Maranatha staff who've been a part of this work for years. But we have to start with the question of why Maranatha entered the well drilling arena in the first place. Since 1969, Maranatha has been constructing buildings, namely Seventh-day Adventist churches and schools around the globe. And for decades, our calling card was building these strong, dignified places of worship and learning. So how did the need for water get Maranatha's attention? Well, it was in the process of doing exactly what Maranatha does, building churches.
Maranatha's construction process uses concrete. And to make concrete, you need water. In many countries, this water isn't hard to get, but it was especially difficult in Mozambique. Maranatha started working here in 2007, and to find the required water for construction, our crews had to travel out into the bush for miles.
Water's very critical to the job because once they start pouring, why, they never quit. I mean, they keep that mixer running just as fast as about 9 guys can go. Typically, you wouldn't see us doing this. We're out in the bush, and as you're out in the bush, you got to take what you get. There's no water out of a hydrant. There's no electric around here. I'm going to guess for probably 15 miles, and this is the way they get the water to mix concrete.
However far they went, what our crew usually found was a dirty source of water. It worked fine for building, but wouldn't be good for drinking. It became apparent that if we're having a hard time finding dirty construction water, what are people finding to drink and cook with? It was a question that kept resurfacing throughout the first year of Maranatha's effort in Mozambique, one that eventually led Maranatha to a historic decision.
I'd like to welcome David Woods to the program. David is currently our country director for Zambia and North America projects, but in the video you just saw, he was overseeing our operations there in Mozambique. In fact, David, that was one of our first projects that we had to build a church in Mozambique, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Masha Batani was the first site that our team went out and actually poured themselves. We had subcontracted one church, the first one. And so our team was out in the bush. We were about 35 kilometers out of Maputo, and water, as you can see in the video, was very difficult to come by. They were getting it out of a seep hole, transferring it into barrels, and driving it to the site. And it takes about 20 barrels to pour the slab, and then you have to have more for the walls and all that. So it was quite a lot of water to get out of that slow little seep hole.
It's hard to imagine, with all the projects Maranatha's done, that you had to get water that way for the entire project to make that happen. It's just amazing. When you first arrived in the country before you started building churches and you were getting our operations set up there, what were your first impressions of the need for water?
In driving around Maputo, looking for houses to rent and shop space where we could set up a fab facility, I saw ladies lined up at wells in cities, and we think big cities have urban systems. And there was a well with a hand pump, and 50 or 100 of these 5-gallon, 20, 25-liter containers stacked up with women waiting for their turn. And I asked the people that were showing me around to houses and all, why are these people all, and they said, well, there's no system. There's no piping to their homes. This is the only access to water they have. And I'm thinking about all the time it would take in your day to wait your turn if you're at the end of that 100-container line.
So you could see immediately that there was this need. But we also had to build schools and churches, and we were getting started with that. But it was when, I think you had told me earlier, when it was time to start planning for some of these school campuses, and you think, how are we going to get water to this campus so that it can operate? And slowly there started to be a shift in the thinking of something that we had solely built churches and schools in the past. There was kind of a shift in thinking, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. It was historically not part of what we did. That was more of a, other NGO type deal. And but seeing the great need in Africa, raised the awareness of that need greater than perhaps in other places we'd been functioning. And we suggested it, and then a donor that was in conversations with Maranatha related to the school campuses brought it up as well. And so the combination of those prompters, got Maranatha thinking wells.
And how did we actually drill the wells back then? Did we have our own drilling rig? Were we contracting? How did that happen?
I had met a guy when we first started importing trucks into Maputo, an Avenus guy that was over in Nelspruit, South Africa, and I'd used his shop facility to park trucks. He had done well drilling with his father in Zimbabwe many years previous. So when the well conversation started going, I recruited him, and there was a volunteer from Salem, Oregon, Gary Burnt, that came over, and they worked together, identified a place to build a rig, and we actually had a drilling rig constructed for work in Mozambique.
And back then, were we drilling at some of the Adventist churches that we had built, or like we do now, or how did that work?
Yes, we were building at all the churches that we put up, then we went back and drilled a well there, and I think 750 wells got drilled in the country.
Wow. What was the response from the church like back then?
They were very excited. It was not part of what the initial commitment had been, so it was a surprise when we started talking water. Of course, they all knew the need, and so they were very excited about it.
Now, water is one of the pillars of what Maranatha does now, but at the time, what was the initial reaction? How did it complement the other structures that Maranatha was building?
Well, it brings the whole community to the church every day, and it's like a magnet that just draws the whole community in there. And then we just were encouraging the local people, this is your opportunity to love on these people and share Jesus' love with them when they're there getting their water every day. So it's a unique opportunity to interact with your neighbors that you wouldn't get if you didn't have the well there.
Now, you've been working for Maranatha for many years. You've seen a lot of buildings dedicated, churches and schools. You've seen wells drilled and the celebrations. But if you could go back to maybe one of the first wells that you drilled back there, what was the reaction like?
Well, ladies in Africa have this thing they do, this ululating, and I won't begin to
try to... Go ahead and, let's hear it.
La, 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 with the tongue. It's quite a unique sound, and when they're super exuberant, they're dancing, they're throwing water up on themselves. Imagine, you've just spent days, every day of your life, you spend half the day hauling water or whatever, and suddenly you have this right in your village. There's great enthusiasm. Those ladies would just be so excited. The kids, just having clean water, no crocodiles, no hippos to deal with. Lots of excitement.
A huge impact.
Very much so.
How has providing clean water to all these communities over the years impacted you personally?
A very strong impact on me. I mean, I can't even begin to put myself in their shoes as to what that's like to do life like them. Within 30, 40 feet in my house, I can get water no matter what end of the house I'm in. So I can't live it, but seeing it and imagining it through their eyes and the impact on literacy and lack of dehydration and cleanliness and a garden by your house, all these kinds of things that a well provides. It's very strong impact for me, and it's a huge privilege and blessing to be a part of.
So David, Mozambique is where we got our start drilling, but you've drilled in many other countries since then. Is there a particular story that comes to mind of a particularly sensational situation that you had to drill in?
Yeah, there was one in Zimbabwe where we'd had a geological survey done, and they told us that we might get a break in the rock at 49 meters where you might find water, and then don't go beyond 70 meters. That'd be the end of it. So we drilled the 49, got a little taste of water, not even enough to keep the dust down, and kept drilling. We reached the 70 meters, and the whole community's there watching, a lot of anticipation, a whole day of dust and drilling. And at 70 meters, we shut the rig down and do we go deeper? Just gonna pour money down a hole if we don't get any water. All the anticipation, film crew was there. We prayed. We got together with the head elder and my colleague Gerald, and we sat there and prayed and said, Lord, you know the need here. Can you bring water out of this rock? We're not finding it. And I made a decision we would drill 10 more meters. And at that point, we were gonna pull the tools and go home. And at 79 meters, 1 meter left, we hit a good well. Wow. And the ladies were jumping and dancing. The head elder's throwing water on his head. I mean, it was just so over the top with excitement. and to see the miracle that had just, happened, because the water wasn't supposed to be down that deep. And what a blessing. Just brought real joy to my heart,
And it's a tough decision to know how long do we keep going here? Because you could keep drilling forever, but at some point, like you said, it's costly. It's
costly, exactly. And you're paying by the meter to drill, and just to keep drilling, if nothing but dust. All that anticipation, imagine being in the village and sitting there on the bank watching that activity, and then if you just say, well, sorry guys, we're going home, we got nothing. And that happens at times. A very painful situation, but this was just one of those really exciting moments.
Praise the Lord. That is an exciting, it's always exciting when you're there and you hit water, and you don't want to not hit water when you're there with a village that's anticipating it. So amazing story. Well, David, thank you so much for all that you've done over the years to bring water to so many communities around the world, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
When we get back, we'll talk with our Vice President of Projects, Kyle Fease, about some of the technical aspects of drilling for water. Welcome back. When Maranatha hits water for a new community, life changes for them instantly. They have more time for their family, for education, for work. It's an amazing thing to witness their response. But how do our crews actually find that water in the first place?
Before lives are changed with consistent, accessible water. Before there is celebration and cheering. Before pure, fresh water bursts from the earth. Before our crew even arrives at a site. Before all of that happens, it starts with a request. Maranatha is a responsive ministry, responding to requests from the Seventh-day Adventist Church around the world. So before we start drilling, we first listen to the needs from the local conference, union, or division of the Adventist Church. After sites are identified, sometimes hydrogeological surveys are conducted to determine where water might be found. Contractors use special technology that indicates where water might lie beneath the surface. From here, they create a report that gives our team a good idea of where exactly to drill for the best chance of hitting water. Then, the practical question of how we will drill is tackled. If the terrain is rough, sometimes a small, portable gas-powered machine is used. Some locations have utilized a tripod scaffolding and the human power to turn a drill. If that's not possible, once in a while, wells are hand-dug, which is a long, laborious process. But many of the wells Maranatha drills around the globe are done by large drilling rigs like this one. Crews drive to a location and set up the rig, which may include a hydraulic arm, compressed air, generator, and water line, all used in the process of drilling. Different tools and systems are available depending on the setting. Different methods are used for hard rock drilling versus mud drilling. And sometimes the drill team may use hammer drilling that pounds away at rock, crushing it. Other times, a rotational method is used as the drill bit spins through softer substances like sand. Often, a rig is accompanied by one or more support vehicles that carry water and additional supplies. No matter the technique, the goal is the same. Find the aquifers below the earth that contain life-giving water. This is what our teams spend long, hot days pursuing. It's the end goal of long trips away from family in rustic conditions. They persevere through all of this because ultimately it leads to this.
Now we have Maranatha's Vice President of Projects, Kyle Feast, joining us. Kyle, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So Kyle, we don't often talk about the technical aspects of water. We see the people celebrating, we see the water being pumped out of a hand pump, but how does water actually, how do we find it? How do we drill down to the depth at which there is some water? What does the drill bit do? Why don't you tell us about that?
So there's lots of different ways to drill, but one of the ways that we use quite a bit is using a drill bit that is driven down by a rod, and as that drill bit goes down in the earth, it turns in a rotary fashion, and oftentimes there's also a hammer effect that is used when we go through rock. So that hammer is breaking loose all of the material, whether it's soft or hard, and those cuttings get sent back up to the surface.
And that's loud.
It's
if
loud.
you can imagine,
Yeah,
you're
the truck
pounding
is
through
loud.
rock. That is
Yeah.
very loud process.
And sometimes you're going through structures such as granite, and it's very, very thick, and so maybe all day long you're drilling through granite. And so that goes slower. As the material gets softer, you can go quicker.
How far down do you have to go before you sort of run out of rope, so to speak? I mean, you're pushing a rod down, and then how does that process continue down into the earth?
So it goes down the length of a drilling rod, and then you stop the process and insert another drilling rod and push that down, and then put in another drilling rod. And the drilling rod depends. We typically go about 500 feet in Kenya, but when we're using contractors, they might have different amounts of drilling rod on their truck, and it also depends upon the ability of the truck to pull the rod back out of the ground. We've drilled as far as 1,000 feet, but typically it's a lot less than that, and usually less than 500 even. And that varies depending on the type of geology that we're encountering.
I think one of the ironic parts of the drilling process when you're using a traditional drilling rig is that you're actually using water to get water. So what is that? How does water used in that process?
Well, as I described the process of the bit cutting the material down in the ground, either the rock or the dirt, that has to come back up to the surface. And so water is pumped down to where the drill bit is, and then flushes the water back up to the surface. And when the water comes back to the surface, it brings all the cuttings with it, cleans it out so that you can continue going deeper.
What sort of determines when we stop drilling? What are the factors at play when you've drilled and drilled and you have a whole community that's there waiting and hoping that you're going to hit water? It's heartbreaking at times to think about quitting, but at what point do you have to stop?
So when we start drilling, we usually have some information that's been gathered by a survey, and that takes into account lots of different things, but that guides our drilling process. The drillers also have a lot of experience of reading the types of material that's coming out of the ground. So they actually create a grid as they are drilling. As they go deeper in the ground, they take a sample of the type of material that's coming out, and they make a grid of that. And I've actually seen the drillers predict pretty well when they're getting closer to types of material that can signal water. So those are things that help us, kind of perhaps know where the water is going to be. But sometimes you don't see any sign of water. And sometimes, even though a survey might tell you that you might be able to predict water in this location, you don't encounter it. However, we've found that there's been a number of occasions where all the indicators say there's going to be no water, but our crew will stop and pray, the villagers will pray, and sometimes they're impressed to keep going. And we have sometimes found that nothing comes of that, and sometimes, many times actually, we've found that we have hit water. So it's a tough call. It's not based on any one indicator. You have to take all the different data and then make a gut decision.
When we do hit water, it gets capped off, or there's some sort of apparatus that is sticking up out of the ground, but it doesn't quite look complete yet. There's a process that goes on after we successfully hit water. So what do we do after?
So once the well is set and they put a pump on top of it, we also have to put a concrete apron around that around that well pump. And that is specifically to help protect the source of the water and to keep it from getting contaminated. So we don't want dirty water going back down along that well pipe to get down to the source of water.
Kyle, when you talk about these hand pumps, how do these mechanical hand pumps actually work? I mean, how is that water actually sucked up from under the earth?
So in a lot of the wells that we are involved with, we put these hand pumps, and these hand pumps obviously have a handle on them. And when the user pumps that handle up and down, it's actually triggering a cylinder that's down below water level that actually pushes water back up the pipe. And so you have to crank that handle several times to get the water going, but then as you keep pumping it, water just pushes itself up the pipe and out the end of the
Spout or whatever.
spout,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not a complicated system, but it's in fact open source. It's not patented by anybody, and so it's fairly simple. But it's something that has proven to work pretty well in the parts of the world that need these pumps. So they're all over the place.
Now, why do we use hand pumps in certain places and other places will have an electric pump and maybe a holding tank of water?
So there's a couple different answers to that. One is that if we're helping a school or a place that needs flushing toilets and they need sinks and things like that, then we need a tank and then a submersible pump to supply that tank and things like that. So that will determine the need for those types of things. But there's also, when we drill a well that goes beyond 100 meters, we can no longer put a hand pump on it. So these hand pumps can't work effectively at that depth. So then we have to put a submersible pump.
Well, our well drilling effort has grown from just one country to now half a dozen countries around the world, and that includes maintenance and repairs. Why is it important for us to service the wells that we've drilled?
So one of the things that is a reality throughout much of Africa and other places around the world that use these hand pumps is that after some numbers of use, they really need repair. And there happens to be a lot of well pumps around, let's say, Africa that no longer work. And that's not something we want to have happen with our well pumps that we're installing. And so we've made a plan to be able to service these well pumps on a regular basis and to make sure that they can continue working for those villagers into perpetuity. So.
Well, one last question for you, Kyle. You know, you've been involved with our water program for years, many different countries. There's been a number of communities, hundreds of communities around the world that have been impacted by your leadership. How has being involved with this whole process impacted you personally?
As I think about some of the places I've been able to visit and to perhaps see the crew working and even help dedicate a new well or new taps and that type of thing, I think back on those interactions and particularly the kids, you know, being able to see people actually be able to regularly access clean water and have something that's going to change their life in a really big way is really meaningful. I also think about the 3,300 or so wells that we've been able to provide around the world, and that, you know, give or take, is serving a lot of people, but it's also, if you look at the production capability of those wells, it could be producing over 8 million gallons of water every day. And that's something that's really cool to think about, that it's making a big impact. And so we're so grateful to everybody that's had a part to, you know, to make that happen.
Well, we're grateful for all the work that you've done over the years, and thank you for being with us here today.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us in this special studio episode of Maranatha Mission Stories. We've learned how Maranatha got into well drilling and technically how it's accomplished. But none of this work happens without your support. We're so grateful to everyone watching who has sponsored a well somewhere in the world. When you give to Maranatha's water program, you're literally changing reality for hundreds of people in each village that we drill. If you'd like to get involved in this work, you can send gifts to Maranatha's address on your screen. You can also give over the phone. Another great way to fund this change through clean water is to join Maranatha's monthly giving program, Wellspring. This community is full of people just like you who commit to donating any amount each month to go towards new water wells, as well as the maintenance of the existing ones, as Kyle mentioned. Each month, this community receives an exclusive email update on how their gift is making a difference around the world. To learn more, go to maranatha.org/wellspring.